This is the third presentation in AME's Pathway to Excellence webinar series, which provides insights and into the pathway forward to sustainable North American manufacturing. Next up in the series, next week on Thursday, we have Jason Myers, who is the CEO of Next Generation Manufacturing Canada. And you can find details about that webinar and all the other great virtual events that we have on our website at ame.org/events. This series also connects to the 36th annual AME International Conference, which will be 100% virtual this October. Conference participants will have access to over 40 hours of best practice programming. You'll be able to access that live or on demand. And if you register before July 31st, you can save an additional $150 off with our early bird discount. Information about that, the conference is available at ame.org/virtual. Before I hand it over, a few housekeeping items. You'll be muted throughout the webinar. Kim Humphrey, AME's President and CEO, will facilitate the question and answer at the end of the presentation, but please put your questions into the Q&A box on your screen at any time during the presentation. It lets them get queued up so we have them when it's time to get to that section. Finally, I wanted to mention that this webinar is free and made possible in part by generous donations to the AME Return Stronger campaign. AME is a nonprofit organization, and donations from individuals, foundations, and companies help us put on these complimentary virtual events and webinars. And if you find value in this, we hope that you'll consider donating to AME through our website at ame.org/returnstronger. Our speaker today is David Brousell. He is the Vice President and Executive Director of the Manufacturing Leadership Council, a unit of the National Association of Manufacturers. He co-founded the MLC in 2008 to allow members to focus on the intersection of advanced technologies and fundamental business change in order to create competitive advantage. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Kim Humphrey to kick off the presentation.
So thanks, Jeff, and we're really excited. This is, as Jeff said, the third in the series of our Pathway to Excellence programming. And today's is going to be very, very interesting. So we're really excited and thankful to you, David, for kind of guiding us through this, the new normal. So I'd like to turn it over to you. As Jeff said, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer those at the end.
Okay, well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Kim, and hello, everyone, and I hope you're all staying safe and healthy through these crazy times we're living in. First, I want to give you some background on the Manufacturing Leadership Council, which we call the digital arm of the National Association of Manufacturers. We became part of the NAM about 2 years ago. Then I'll go through the results of our new survey on the impact of COVID-19 on manufacturing. And I'll also discuss the importance of digitization and the data it generates to the ability of manufacturers to be flexible and agile, really important characteristics at this point in time, and to remain competitive in the years ahead. So I always like to start these with our vision statement that we've had for a long time here at MLC, and that is a statement that really talks about the higher purpose that manufacturing has in our society. All of you out there who are in manufacturing companies making products, delivering services around those products, you're doing that work every day, but you're doing something else that's really important in addition. And that is you're creating the conditions for a better life for people everywhere. And we deeply believe at MLC that manufacturing is the fundamental driver of economic and social prosperity in our country. Not a fundamental driver, but the fundamental driver. And that without manufacturing, there's really no economy. So what we're doing every day as an industry is absolutely essential, not only to the economic health of our country, but also all of our people and our social prosperity and health. Next slide, Jeff, please. Our mission as the digital arm of the NAM has always been to help manufacturing companies transition to the digital model of manufacturing. And we do that, we think, in a very unique way by focusing not only on the technology, but also on the ramifications and implications of technological change on how organizations are structured, how they work, the culture of those organizations, and very importantly, how leaders lead in the digital age. It requires a different set of, or I should say an additional set of competencies, which we call digital acumen, that includes things like understanding the potential of new technologies, understanding how to operate and lead people in a flatter, more collaborative organizational environment, and a number of other issues. So that's our mission as a council. It's been that way since our founding in 2008. Next slide, Jeff, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about our portfolio of products and services that we've been offering for a great deal of time. So at the center is our council itself. It's a cross-functional group of manufacturing executives. This is kind of different than many other associations. Our group consists of executives from operations, supply chain, information technology, product design and development, and even research and development units within manufacturing companies. Occasionally, we also get people from the legal and HR departments of manufacturing companies that want to be part of it. Because one of the central founding principles of the council has always been that the manufacturing company has to be integrated, has to work as one unit. And we kind of constantly rail against silos, whether there's based on systems or processes. That's not going to be the formula for success moving into the future. You have to be an integrated organization, and so we very much believe in the cross-functional approach, as well as cross-sector. So we have about 170 member companies representing about 1,800 members. You can see some of the logos. I'm sure you're very familiar with them. It's a good mix of small, medium, and large companies from all the sectors, from automotive to aerospace and defense, metal fabrication, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, big and small. One of the things we've learned over the years is it's really important to have this mix because the big learn from the small and the small learn from the big. Next slide, please. We're guided by a member-driven thing that we call the critical issues agenda. It's essentially our strategic plan. And it focuses us in everything we do, whether it's live events, whether it's our annual conference, whether it's our awards program, or whether it's our 6-time-a-year magazine called the Manufacturing Leadership Journal, around everything we do. And this year we have 6 critical issues that the membership has approved that focus on things such as factories of the future, M4.0 cultures, which I mentioned, sustainability, transformative technologies, next generation leadership in the changing workforce. And this year, as kind of an emergency critical issue, the COVID-19 response and recovery issues that we're all dealing with. So that's kind of our strategic plan. It's refreshed every year and approved by our members. Next slide, please, Jeff. So let me go a little bit now into the kind of the meat of the presentation. And, you know, the time we're in is no surprise that the watchword of our time has become adaptability. It's a competency powered by digitization. It has become clear that manufacturers that had embraced the digital model prior to the pandemic were in a far better position to adapt to rapidly changing market conditions, and in some cases, swiftly pivot production to equipment and products needed to fight the pandemic than those companies that had not embraced the model or had not embraced it strongly enough. Next slide, Jeff. In our new survey on the effects of the pandemic on manufacturing, results of which were published last month in our Manufacturing Leadership Journal, 70% of survey respondents said that the previous levels of digitization that they had incorporated into their operations were important in their ability to respond rapidly to the crisis, with 46% of this group terming that importance essential. Next slide, Jeff. Moreover, what has become clear as a result of the pandemic is that the industry has arrived at an inflection point in adoption of the digital model. The importance of the digital model has become immediate and will change forever the mindsets of those who thought it was still years away. Once companies stabilize financially and reintegrate their workforces safely into their plants and factories again, adoption of digitization, which the council calls manufacturing 4.0, will accelerate as companies work to ensure that they have the flexibility and speed required in a time when adaptability is not only key to surviving, but thriving as well. In our new survey, as you can see from this chart, 53% of respondents said they expect the adoption of automation and digital technologies to accelerate. The top three areas of concentration are real-time data and analytics, remote monitoring and operation, and more flexible manufacturing processes. Next slide, Jeff. So what are the targets of the intended acceleration? The three top areas are real-time data and analytics, an increased focus on remote monitoring and operation of plant floor equipment and processes, and a greater focus on enabling more nimble and flexible manufacturing processes. We can see this in almost every conversation we're having these days with companies about their ability to ramp up their capability to remotely monitor their plant floors, get data from those remote monitorings, and adjust on the fly as they attempt to meet rapidly volatile changes in demand and supply. Next slide, please, Jeff. Supply chains, too, are under scrutiny right now as a result of the crisis. Manufacturers want greater resiliency. They want insights through an increased adoption of analytics, and they are also rethinking supply chain complexity and configurations. No surprise here, considering the shortages of key equipment like PPE that we've been all suffering under. But our survey indicates that it is still too early to tell whether this reaction to the crisis will result in a long-term reshoring trend. We do expect to see some of this, but how sustained is still unclear to us. Next slide, Jeff. One of the most interesting and potentially consequential effects of the pandemic will be on corporate culture. For many years now, manufacturing companies have been transitioning to a collaborative organizational model, as I mentioned earlier, from traditional command and control models. The pandemic has resulted in a much greater emphasis on a company's ability to collaborate to react to sudden disruption. But of course, the ability to do this successfully requires the right process, leadership buy-in, and lots of communication, which we have been seeing throughout the crisis. Executives in manufacturing companies and many of our members have been telling us that they're spending more time than they've ever have before on employee communications through this crisis as we all try to sort out basic things like even how to enter a factory. Next slide, Jeff. Work practices have also been impacted as manufacturers have had to deal with health and safety requirements of a nature and on a scale that most have never had to before. In addition to the more extensive and regular cleaning regimens companies now have to engage in, more employees are working virtually than ever before, a change that has enabled many companies to see the potential and benefits of the remote model for certain employees. We also expect that many companies will accelerate their investments in automation and will emphasize upskilling of employees as a result. Just prior to the start of this webinar, for example, we were talking about the impact of remote working on a lot of companies' real estate footprints. There are already many companies talking about ways that they might be able to shrink those footprints and save money in the process. Next slide, Jeff, please. Lastly, if there is a silver lining to the pandemic and its effects on our industry, it is that many believe that the public perception of manufacturing, which is so essential to attracting the next generation of workers, will improve as more and more people realize the importance of manufacturing to the nation's well-being and security. I was very encouraged by the result on this particular slide, where 66% of the respondents indicated that they thought the public perception would improve going forward as a result of the great reaction that the manufacturing industry had to combating the virus. And as many of you know, particularly those who have been in the industry for a long period of time, we fought against the perception that manufacturing is dark, dirty, and dangerous for a long time. And it has been a major constraint on our ability to attract people, new people, young people to the industry. I hope this new perception does indeed take hold. So next slide, Jeff. And I want to turn now to an area that we look at very, very closely at the council, and that is the data situation. Sorry about that phone interruption, but that's our modern virtual life, isn't it? I'm going to talk about what we call the Manufacturing 4.0 data imperative. Next slide, Jeff. So let's turn now to that essential main product that manufacturers want and need from the myriad investments in operational and information technologies, which is data. Not just raw data, but actionable information and insights from data that can uncover unmet needs, help make more timely and accurate business decisions, help run operations more efficiently and autonomously, anticipate and predict future conditions of equipment on the plant floor, and that can create the flexibility, agility, and speed that 21st century organizations need to be competitive. As you can see from this, this graph, an overwhelming sentiment that of the essential nature of being able to get data and use it wisely. Next slide, please. The message in this finding is simple yet profound. Manufacturers that become skilled at generating meaningful data about their operations, organizing that data well, extracting insights from it that they trust, and then acting on it with dispatch, will not only remain competitive in the race, but will have a more competitive future. Data mastery is as essential in the fourth industrial revolution as electricity was in the third industrial revolution. Just look at those graphs and you can see why our manufacturers think this is the case. Next graph, Jeff, please. So you see the headline on that graph. It's not a typo or an error. It is that high, 500%. Respondents to our new study on data mastery, which was published in May in our journal, expect a mind-numbing explosion of data volumes in the next couple of years. As more and more physical objects become connected in their business ecosystems and generate data from everything from product usage to customer experiences to equipment utilization and more. The challenge, though, is, so to speak, refining the crude oil, organizing data, normalizing it, analyzing it, and then having decision-making processes that can take advantage of it. And that latter piece is really essential. We're all generating lots of data, but if we haven't restructured our decision-making processes around it, we're probably going to be in suboptimal mode in being able to use the data. But in a sign that many companies are still climbing the maturity curve on understanding the value of their data, as you can see on the right-hand side of that slide, our study also shows that apart from a general impact on operational performance, many companies are still trying to develop value models around their data and information assets. They're trying to measure the value. They're trying to understand the impact on their financial performance, as well as other operational metrics. And this is a work in progress as the industry starts to develop more and more metric models to understand the impact of the digital model. Next slide, please. Apart from the governance issue, how do manufacturers rate their ability to take advantage of their data assets? Only 18% of the respondents to our survey indicated that they are very capable of analyzing their manufacturing data. Nearly half, around 47%, are still in the process of learning how to do so. Perhaps this is not unexpected though, because especially considering that only half have a process in place to verify the accuracy and quality of their data, we are still climbing the curve, so to speak, on being able to create what we at MLC call digital acumen. But the key takeaway here on this graph is that learning really needs to accelerate given the expected explosion of data volumes. We've got two curves heading in collision here. The growth of the data volumes and our ability to process them for good business value results. Next slide, please, Jeff. The finding here could be called either separating the wheat from the chaff or finding the needle in the haystack. You can pick your favorite cliche. The issue, as this data point underscores, clearly has to do with volume and acumen, but it may also suggest a lack of clear business goal definition and alignment. One of the things we have seen is that many times some of the projects, some of the activities at the operational level don't necessarily align well with overall corporate business goals and objectives. Aligning those two together are really very, very important, and it's often not easy, as I'm sure many of you know. The next graph, please, Jeff. This final slide from our surveys makes me very optimistic about manufacturers' future ability to leverage data from operations and achieve the improvements and higher level of competitiveness they want and need. That's because there are a bevy of challenges, a whole raft of challenges to data mastery evidenced in the survey, but most of them are technical issues, not game-stopping cultural issues like trust. The key takeaway here is that manufacturing leadership has an affinity for data-driven decision-making. Once the technical hurdles are cleared, there's no limit to what might be achieved. So it's really a question of putting together those data-driven decision-making processes, creating the trust, and moving forward, because most manufacturing people who certainly have, in many cases, engineering backgrounds, understand the importance and the validity of data in what they do. So let's move to the next slide, and I'll kind of wrap up this section of the presentation with some key takeaways. It's clear to us that manufacturing 4.0 or industry 4.0, whatever you would like to call it, has moved past its first dimension or first stage. As companies are trying to scale pilot projects and projects within their organizations, oftentimes they get into what the industry is calling pilot purgatory, which means it's very difficult sometimes to scale projects to the enterprise level because of a variety of issues, some of which have to do with goal alignment, some of which have to do with being able to prove return on investment. But we have clearly, as an industry, moved past first base with M4.0 into the second phase or second dimension of the trend, where it's starting to be much more of a factor in competitiveness. The pandemic has certainly underscored the need to move aggressively and accurately in what you're doing in order to cope with disruption and to improve your own competitiveness. We think, as I mentioned before, that the pandemic which we didn't expect to happen, of course, has amounted to an inflection point in the trend. And we're going to see considerable acceleration around adoption of the digital model once things settle down, once companies stabilize financially, once workforces come back and we overcome the fear of their reincorporation into plants and factories. But, and as companies have learned more through virtual working, we're going to see a lot more emphasis on the embrace of the digital model, particularly around data analytics and artificial intelligence and advanced robotics going forward. As we've seen from our surveys and in our conversations with a lot of our members, there's a whole raft of very important goals associated with the model. Not only operational efficiency and better decision-making capability, but greater speed and flexibility are very, very important goals. And many companies as well are trying to think outside the box, where they can reinvent themselves, rethink their business models around the digital idea, and create new products and services for their customers, for their markets, and move to a higher level based on the new model. The key in many of these endeavors is what I mentioned before. It's data mastery. If data is the new oil in our world, and many believe it is, the better we get at being able to master the data coming out of our operations, our customer interfaces and engagements, from our own people on the innovation side, the more competitive we can be. Data mastery is not easy. Many companies in the manufacturing industry struggle with decades of investments in systems and technologies that do not work together, that generate data that's incompatible. This is what I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, where we have to integrate our companies and create the one company. So getting to the point, getting to the promised land of data mastery really does require a rationalization of those systems and processes going forward. Part of the journey, and a very important part of the journey on that data mastery, is to deal with the issues of governance, analytic competency, and business goal alignment. It's not enough just to put the technology in. In fact, that's probably the most easiest part of this whole thing, but it's aligning the organization, aligning the business with these investments to produce desired outcomes. And that takes a great deal of orchestration on the part of companies. And some are good at that, and some have much to learn on that, but it is the linchpin that determines success. So with that, I'd like to now move to the next slide and give you some of our kind of pointers here that we talk to people about at MLC, about how to think about the digital model and how to move forward with it in a way that you can be successful with it. So go to the next slide, please, Jeff. So we call these guiding principles. And what we ask people to do is, in many ways, is to take out a fresh sheet of paper and really think big about manufacturing 4.0. Yes, it will provide incremental improvements in cost and efficiency. It will help you do things faster, but don't stop there. Think big about it. Think broadly about it in ways that you can break through, create breakthroughs in products, services, and ways you deal with your customers and satisfy your customers. The digital model offers a whole new raft of opportunities to think about the business. So just don't think about it in incremental ways. Think about it in big, holistic ways. When you do, develop a business strategy based on the digital model. Don't try to align M4.0 objectives around conventional business strategy. That doesn't really work. There's a lesson we learned many, many years ago when we started to put in ERP systems in companies, that if you did not rethink your business processes before putting in the new system, the whole project was more likely to have problems or even fail if you did not. So you really had to rethink the process before you applied the technology. M4.0 business strategy is kind of like that. You really have to think about the potential and capabilities of the digital model before you start strategizing about how to change things. So we advocate that. We also advocate, and it kind of ties to point one, think about being a market disruptor. Don't think about using manufacturing 4.0 just to protect your competitive position as it is today. Think about what your competitive advantage might be or has to be 10 years from now and move forward on that. How can you disrupt your own market using the digital model before somebody else disrupts you? This lesson has already been learned in other industries. All you have to do is think about hospitality, transportation, hotels, taxi kind of services, and how they've been disrupted. We are on the precipice of that now here in manufacturing. It's also very important to create a culture of manufacturing 4.0 innovation and success in which employees feel empowered by information, but also importantly, that they can take risks and even fail because they can learn from that failure. If your culture does not allow that sort of things, rethink the culture. It's very important to be able to experiment, to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and move forward. The next point is these insights from data and data analytics. Most organizations are probably not that good at data analytics right now. It's a new discipline for a lot of organizations, whether you're in manufacturing or in some other industry. But this is where a lot of the future is going to lie. Your ability to take data from all aspects of your operations and your company, really mine that data and discover unmet needs that your customers probably don't know they even need, or ways of doing things that can improve what you're doing in a step change fashion. So if you haven't really gotten into analytics or even brought people into your workforce who are data scientists or analytics experts, you have to start thinking about that. These are some of the new skills that every manufacturing company is going to need in the digital era. So, and there's a lot to be gained there. So next slide, Jeff, please. I touched on this at the beginning, and this all goes back to the integrated enterprise and being able to act as one and leveraging all your resources effectively. We deeply believe that collaborative cross-functional teams are the way to go. They learn from each other. They diffuse knowledge about M4.0. They get an organization to work together. We have long talked about in this industry, for example, in bringing OT or operational technology teams and IT teams together. That's absolutely essential, but we have to do that organization-wide, enterprise-wide, and create these teams to really leverage the brain power and the capabilities and the experiences of everybody in the ecosystem to move the company forward. A very important point too is we still, as an industry, are grappling with the workforce issue. And that is to diversify your workforce and leadership teams. Right now, only 29% of the manufacturing workforce consists of women. It's a great source of talent, as is bringing in veterans and people of diverse backgrounds and educational experiences. The moment couldn't be more ripe for it, considering what's going on. But beyond that, it really does bring greater knowledge, capability, perspectives into a company so you can move forward in developing new things and innovating. So diversify your workforce and leadership teams is absolutely essential guiding principle, we think, around manufacturing 4.0. this whole thing around digital acumen in leadership teams, our surveys have shown for quite a few years now that a lot of manufacturing executives are worried that their leadership teams do not have the digital skills necessary to move them forward. And there's lots of reasons for that. But companies have to embark on programs to develop those digital skills. And part of it is identifying some of the functions that will be needed in manufacturing companies along the digital trail. We have done some work on this with one of our council member companies, MXD, formerly the Digital Manufacturing and Design Institute in Chicago. We have identified about 168 digital roles and functions that manufacturing companies are going to need going into the future. Some of them have very weird and odd sounding titles like data ethicist. What does a data ethicist do? Well, it's probably associated with artificial intelligence, which will be a factor for many of us in our companies. But this need to develop digital acumen in our leadership teams is really essential if we're going to be able to move forward competitively in our companies with the digital model, as well as a national industry in comparison to the rest of the world. And this couldn't be more striking than in some research that the World Economic Council has done around what they call so-called lighthouse factories. Factories that exhibit the best in manufacturing 4.0 accomplishments. So far, they've identified 44 of the lighthouse factories. Only 3 are in the US. Most of the others are in Asia or in Europe. So this digital acumen requirement is really critical, not only for individual company competitiveness, but for our national competitiveness as the United States. Lastly, we tell people, particularly those who are kind of on the early part of the learning curve or the maturity curve on manufacturing 4.0, don't immediately try to apply conventional ROI metrics to M4.0 projects. We all know we need return, certainly do, on any project we invest money in. But if you're early on in the game, be prepared to experiment, learn, take some risks, go back, experiment again, learn, take some risks, and then apply our ROI metrics around the digital model, not conventional, but around the digital model on your projects going forward. There is a learning curve here that has to be climbed. And it's not a small one, but if you take it in the right way, you can accomplish what you need to accomplish going forward without upsetting expectations or frustrating yourself with regard to return. So those are our guiding principles here at the Manufacturing Leadership Council about the M4.0 model. We continue to work on these things. We continue to develop our ideas. I hope this was helpful and informative for you today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
So thank you, David. This is very, very informative. We appreciate your insight. And also, it's really encouraging to hear that out of something bad, something good is coming about, and it's that newfound respect for manufacturing. So many of us on this call are from the manufacturing world, so I think we appreciate that. We've got a couple of questions. Christine wants to know, who were the participants in your survey? Were they all organizations from your council?
Yeah, they were organizations from our council, as well as from the NAM, our parent. So typically the respondents will be in those functional areas I mentioned before. We have council members at the operational level, the supply chain area, IT, product design and development, really across the spectrum of manufacturing functions in the enterprise.
Good, thank you. So what companies do you see as leading the way in this post-pandemic era?
With the M4.0 model, there's a whole range of them. There's many large companies that are doing very interesting things around the model, like Dow Chemical, like Ford Motor Company, like GM is doing some very interesting things around the model in analytics. Many small companies are also making a lot of progress on this in specific areas, in being able to, and this is kind of on the Internet of Things level, in being able to do some advanced monitoring of their plant floor equipment and being able to get ahead of maintenance requirements. A lot of companies start at that level. They incorporate sensors into the equipment. They start generating some data. They're able to get ahead of the performance of the equipment to some extent. Many, though, are still trying to climb the curve where they can get to a predictive model of this. But that's the direction they want to go in. They want to be able to really predict a failure before it occurs, which has obvious ramifications on uptime and ability to deliver product, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of companies. It's really across the board by industry sector, whether you're in automotive or aerospace and defense or pharmaceuticals. We've seen some great projects at Merck, for example, around M4.0, whether you're in chemicals or other sectors. The difference, I guess, is scale. In the larger companies, we're seeing more attempts to scale a lot of these projects to multiple plants. We have a lot of conversations with council members that are they accomplish a project. It could be an IoT project or a maintenance project on the plant floor, and they want to try to replicate it across a footprint of 20, 30, 40, 50 plants. If they can do that successfully, the benefits are enormous. So that's probably the best answer I could give you on that. Hope that.
Great. You talked about the pharmaceuticals. One of the questions that we had from one of the people is, how much of the offshore products do you think will be coming home, and how do you see, Manufacturing 4.0 impacting that?
Everybody's wondering, about how much might return. I think there's definitely going to be a push to have indigenous manufacturing capability around essential things coming out of the pandemic, particularly in areas that we may be weak in or completely absent in. Lots of big companies in the pharmaceutical or other industry sectors are global companies. So they have situated plants and factories where they have to satisfy local demand. That's going to continue to a large extent. There could be some pushback if things heat up in the East, so to speak. But I see a lot of that continuing. I do see some of it coming back, but at this point, we really don't know how much.
Yeah, I think we're all looking at that right now, so I appreciate that. Yeah. So another question that came up was, we're in a very cost-conscious time right now with manufacturing. And so how do you encourage organizations to focus on innovation versus really that day-to-day getting product out, trying to align their work?
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act, isn't it? I mean, you're trying to meet the day-to-day. I think this is always an issue for lots of companies. Some companies have done it by putting together, small groups that can innovate, centers of excellence, for example, where they can kind of do it in parallel, so they don't try to impact people who are trying to fulfill the day's requirements, so to speak. So you have to keep your eye on the ball on innovation, because if you don't, you potentially could suffer in the near term and the long term. And I think smart management understands that, and it comes down to how you organize around it. And if you can figure out a way to do it in a way that doesn't impact continuous operations, you can probably move forward with it, and allocate the resources necessary to do so. There's also opportunities to not only try to do everything yourself, but to leverage what we call your business ecosystem. Engage with local colleges and universities, engage with other manufacturers in your area, associations, put together partnerships around innovation, crowdsource ideas. There's ways of tackling the beast and not try to do it all yourself. So I think there's a number of ways to keep the innovation ball rolling, which is essential, and also put bread on the table every day, so to speak.
Exactly, exactly. So this is a little bit off this topic, but someone wanted to asked about virtual work. What are you seeing in best practices for companies that are going virtual, people working from home?
This is a developing thing. So we were actually talking about this before the webinar started. So here at MLC, we've always been virtual. So when the pandemic hit, this was really nothing new for us. We've already done this. Our colleagues at the NAM, however, particularly those who have worked in, who work in our DC office, our big DC headquarters office, is new to them. And particularly those with young children, it's been quite a challenge, quite an adjustment to try to juggle work and try to juggle family responsibilities, particularly if young children are involved. So what we've seen on the best practice side is you've got to set some rules so that people don't burn out with this, because the virtual model is exactly that. It's virtual. It doesn't respect time and space. And what we've done at MLC is we've set some rules around this. We try to limit the number of meetings. If we are going to have meetings, we put some time limits on those meetings. We don't try to schedule meetings outside the 8 to 5 barriers. Now, with us, we have some associates that are not in the same time zone, so there is some flexibility there. If you're in a company that has operations all over the place, you've got to deal with time zones. I've dealt with that for years as well. So you have to have flexibility there, but you've got to have some rules around length of engagement, how many you're going to do. We're all inundated with much higher volumes of email, for example, going through this crisis. My email load must have gone up by 40% personally through this. So we're trying to cut back on that. It's an evolving area as people grapple with this issue of the model itself, which, as I said, doesn't respect time or space. You've got to put some parameters around it, or else it's really going to burn people out. I'm already hearing, we talked about this also before the webinar. We're already seeing people saying they're virtually fatigued. Too many Zoom calls, too many GoToWebinar calls, too many other things of that nature. So you have to really boil it down to what's essential for what you're doing in your job, and does it align with the essential things? I mean, if you're responsible for revenue in your company and you're getting involved in things that don't directly impact revenue, should you be doing that? You have to make some hard decisions along the way. So it's going to come down to good policies that respect people and respect a sane working environment, I think, going forward. But there's going to be a lot of pushing the envelope on this. There's no question about it. Why? Because we can. And we're going to have to walk some of it back, I think, over time as we get more mature about it.
Perfect. Yeah, we did talk about that earlier, didn't we?
Yeah.
So this is the final question. We're getting down to the wire here, but you talked about the skills gap, the
Yep.
existing skills gap. What about that future skills gap? What can we do collectively for the future skills gap that we know is occurring in industry from our youth? Do you have any best practices there?
Yeah, lots of things. Lots of organizations are working on not only the basics like STEM, but they're also trying to identify the new skills and functions and competencies we're going to need as we move more in a more developed way into the digital model. So you got to work with your universities, you've got to work with your fellow manufacturers to identify this. There's lots of research that has to be done around this as well to understand in your particular manufacturing environment the types of functions and people you're going to need. A big part of this is working to improve this perception of manufacturing. The NAM and our sister organization, the Manufacturing Institute, have done research for years that show what the problem is. When we go out and we ask people, do you think manufacturing is essential to the U.S. economy? Overwhelmingly, people say yes. And then when you ask them in the next question, would you recommend manufacturing as a career path to your children? The numbers plummet. And it all has to do with the perception of manufacturing. So changing this perception with every interaction we have with people in our companies, in our communities is absolutely essential. You may recall that before the pandemic hit, the NAM started a major campaign called Creators Wanted to help change the perception of manufacturing. We had a whole program associated with this. It will come back later. It's been put on hold since the pandemic, but the whole objective of it was to really make a dent in this problem that we've got in attracting young people and changing the minds of their parents about manufacturing so that we can bring them into the manufacturing industry and make a dent in the huge numbers we've been fighting. So up until the pandemic hit, we had about just under 500,000 open jobs in US manufacturing. And I've been in manufacturing for over 20 years, and as long as I've been in manufacturing, we've had this problem. Of course, it's gotten more acute, but the whole goal of Creators Wanted was to change these perceptions, work with communities, bring young people in, and try to make a dent in this number, which was, and it could be a little bit different now, but it was projected to increase to over 2 million open jobs by the mid-decade, by the mid-20s. So the purpose of the Creators Wanted campaign was to make a 600,000 job dent in that number through these programs. We have to continue to focus on this and move forward with it. The big issue I see going forward, I think there's three issues associated with the workforce problem. One has to do with retirees. We have a lot of people in the manufacturing industry who are at or have reached retirement age. They're either left or going to be leaving, and they're taking a lot of knowledge with them. Number two is the perception problem that I've talked about, which you all know, and how we need to reverse that to change mindsets and bring younger people in. And the third level of challenge is these new digital roles and functions that we're going to have as an industry if we're going to be successful. The big issue with the third piece is that a lot of these roles and functions are what I call horizontal. They're roles like data analyst, data scientist, digital ethicist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are the kind of jobs, they're technology jobs, essentially, that every industry wants, whether So we're going to be competing as a manufacturing industry with banking, with insurance, with transportation, with entertainment, with every industry you can think about for these people. We have to be competitive. We have to show them that not only can we pay competitively, but you can have an exciting, fulfilling, rewarding career in manufacturing, because today's manufacturer is not your father's Oldsmobile.
Mhm. Absolutely, David. I totally appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we're out of time now, but we really appreciate your insight today. And this is, like Jeff said, this is the third in the series for our Pathway to Excellence program. So if you want to see more, you can go to our website at ame.org. But also our next event is next week on July 23rd. It's Jay Myers. He's going to talk about advanced manufacturing, very aligned to what we're talking about today. Jay is the CEO of Next Generation Manufacturing in Canada. And as you all know, we just rolled out our annual conference in October. So if you go online, you can see all the exciting presenters we're going to have. So again, David, thank you so much for your insight today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.